Hello and welcome to another extremely backlogged video. And once again, things are about to get steep. Wool is probably the most repeated word in my cycling lexicon, and you can probably guess what the objective behind this challenge was. One ride within a limited radius, cramming in as many distressingly steep climbs as possible. My favourite type of ride contains a minimal amount of time spent on flat roads, and I particularly love rides where you can string together loads of tough climbs without straying far from your starting location. It's a great workout, mentally stimulating and time efficient, a real bang for your buck. My first taste of this adventure come interval session from hell came during my early years of road cycling in the form of a group ride. We'd roll around local roads I was familiar with before suddenly deviating off up random 20% byways and battling it out to the top. I tended to miss pace every single climb as I had no idea what I was doing, but those Tuesday evenings were an absolute blast and inspired me to explore the inconspicuous sort of roads I'd previously cruised past without a thought. This particular wall challenge is located right around Monaco without ever actually going into Monaco. My temporary base when staying in the area has always been down by the coast, kind of at the bottom of a cliff, which means that most rides are straight uphill from the door. It's about a 20-minute climb until you reach the gateway to more roads and mountains, and I found that I wasn't really getting very far when I was only riding for an hour or two. So over the years I've discovered lots of fun little back roads to add a bit of spice into my morning and lunch rides. I've always wanted to compile the worst of them, the best of them, into one abdominal wrenching ride, and here it is. This route features 8 walls based between the Basse Corniche and La Turbie. They're all about 2 to 10 minutes long and feature copious gradients exceeding 20%. It starts on the Moyenne Corniche and goes straight into the first and shortest effort of the ride, followed by a gentle climb before dropping down and hitting the longest effort of the ride. This takes you up through La Turbie, then drops back down to the Moyenne Corniche in Beausoleil. The remainder of the ride works its way back up to La Turbie with frequent detours up yet more walls and a tough finale up the appropriately named worst shortcut ever. I've done a similar route to this before but made a few modifications to smooth things out, and in the spirit of the challenge I threw in a brand new climb as well. So that's what I had in store, not even 25 kilometers, surely it wouldn't take long. I thought that for this video I'd make an effort to get some high octane behind the scenes footage. So here's me tightening my shoes, going down the lift, loading up the route, yeah that's it. I had a couple minutes of gentle climbing before hitting the first proper climb of the day. The rock promontory you can see up there is the tête de chat, meaning dog head, although I've been trying to figure out the exact resemblance for years. It overlooks Monaco and is a good hike up from where I'm cycling now. You can also see a road cutting back and forth across the mountain face. This climbs up to La Turbie, which sits just a bit further back and is one of the most popular routes up into the hills from the coast. I'm sort of heading towards that road now, but it's not going to stay quite that straightforward. Even though most people come to the Côte d'Azur to ride revered climbs such as Col de la Madone and probably don't have any interest in the weird little lanes I'm riding today, hopefully it will give you a few ideas if you're looking to try something a bit different. These kind of routes can also be good to do if the weather's looking temperamental further inland and you just want to keep it close to the coast. That being said, this first climb I'm about to do is utterly bizarre and might not be selling this wall challenge too well, but I promise they're not all like this. This busy road I'm about to cross is the Moyenne Corniche, and this roundabout junction often leads to chaos from all directions as it's a super confusing layout. Most of the Moyenne Corniche, or middle road, is fine to cycle along, but this section is particularly busy as it's right by a motorway junction and sees a lot of commuter traffic into Monaco. The typical way to climb to La Turbie would be to go left here and ride along it for about half a kilometre before turning right onto a quieter road. But a few years ago I discovered this shortcut to skip that busy section, and this is the way I always come now. Straight away this is breaking many rules in terms of what qualifies as a road, but here we go with the first one, Le Petit Romain. These lower barriers haven't always been here. They were installed a few years ago to prevent mopeds from zooming through, which was quite a common occurrence. They might have taken any KOM attempts off the cards, but we probably shouldn't be doing that anyway. The segment only averages 11.5%, but that's not a very accurate reflection of the climb, which is the case for most walls throughout this ride. This is partly because Strava introduced a minimum distance for segment creation, which means that some of these walls are actually too short to have congruent segments, even though they take a fair few minutes to get up. and some of them include some flat bits just to meet that distance requirement. So here's a slightly more detailed look at the elevation and gradient breakdown. Once you get through the first narrow slalom section, you're on to a regular residential road. It hovers around 15-20%, and since it's so straight you can see it all lying out ahead of you. It's a bit cruel to do this right at the start of a ride, but I think it's kind of nice to shock stiff legs straight out the gate. Climbing when you're not warmed up properly always feels horrible, but super steep roads gets all the muscles activated quickly. It could also potentially lead to injury, so proceed with caution. I didn't have any ambitions or pacing strategies for this ride beyond just finishing the route. It's guaranteed that you'll have to push quite hard just to make it up most of these climbs, so I was just letting the effort decide itself. Le Petit Romain is the perfect one to start with because it's so short, about 2.5 minutes for me. It flattens out towards the end as you approach Route de la Turbie. This is the road I mentioned previously, and we'll take a right to continue climbing up, having effectively chopped out a big busy hairpin. So first wall done. I stopped my front camera to preserve battery life and continued climbing for another 3 kilometers. Instead of going right to the top, I'll be dropping back down and climbing all the way up again via wall number 2. And while I was still going up, I realized that I could see the road just across the valley. That's where we're going. To get to it, I descended a quiet road to Les Serriers. This is really the only way to get there unless you go on the Moyen Corniche, which you can actually see at the end there. But once again, I don't recommend that. It's a sharp turn and there's no hanging about, you're straight into it. This is the most well-known climb of the day, and it's also the longest, 1.5 kilometers at 14.5%, within which there's half a kilometer averaging 18%. This first bit is already quite steep, but it lulls you into a false sense of security as with each turn it cranks up another notch. And right when you think it's probably not going to get much worse, that's when the hard part actually begins. I discovered this road 4 years ago, and even though I've ridden it quite a lot, I never fail to underestimate its viciousness. The first time I did this, I was convinced it was the steepest climb I'd ever ridden, and this was after I'd done some pretty notorious hills in the UK. Nowadays, I've seen more, and I can tell you that there are much worse out there, but it's still quite crazy. My previous video features one of those much worse climbs, Chemin de la Tella, which lies just a few kilometers away. My first attempt up that was the day before this ride, and I think I perhaps went into this ride with too much confidence, thinking that all the climbs would be comparably breezy. I'm just passing a 30% gradient warning sign which signals the toughest pitch of the climb. You're not likely to be carrying much momentum into this given what's fallen before, and it's always a real challenge to keep the pedals turning. Even though that's the worst bit done, the road undulates for a while longer, and every time you think it's the final kick, it flattens out for a moment and then kicks up again. I say flatten, but that's probably still like 10% because that's flat in the context of this madness. It's difficult to find a rhythm, and something about this climb always makes me feel atrociously unfit. Still lots of fun though, and I'd recommend it to anyone, especially as it's also a rare wall that isn't a dead end. You can't see it too well, but La Turbie is just on the right there, growing slowly closer, which is where we'll be in a minute. I did a little acceleration to the summit there, but it turned out not to be the summit. Yeah, that wasn't the summit either. This yield sign signals that the actual summit is near, but at this point I'd been hoodwinked too many times and used up all of my sprinting willpower. So it's a bit of a spiritless finish, I'm afraid. The road joins the Grand Corniche, and if you go left here, you'll eventually reach the summit of Col d'Ez, and if you go right, you'll shortly be in La Turbie. With the longest wall of the day complete, it was time for the longest descent of the day. I created this route so that the main descent is on a road that's actually nice to descend. This is Route de Beausoleil, which they climbed up in the final stage time trial of the 2024 Tour de France. After that descent, it was time for the spaghetti portion of the ride. 4 out and back climbs peeling off the Moyenne Corniche in quick succession. This turn is a bit easy to miss, but it's obvious that you're on track when you see the road rearing up ahead of you. This one is as straightforward as it gets, 700 meters at 16%, no turns, just steep all the way. Even though it might not look hugely exciting, I always enjoy the ski slope nature of this climb. It actually looks as steep as it feels, which is quite rare and somehow makes it more satisfying. Monaco sits just below, and you can see the high-rise buildings popping into view, really at harmony with their environmental surroundings. There's an opportunity for some respite in the middle before the gradient shoots back up towards 20%. I was feeling quite tired, which wasn't a great sign as this was only climb number 3 of 8. But most of the remaining ones are just a few minutes long, and having successfully fooled myself that the worst was behind me, I was starting to enjoy it a lot more. There always seems to be a bunch of loose rocks near the top, and then it's a really abrupt finish when you reach this concrete bollard. If you climb over, there's a trail that continues all the way up to La Turbie, but that's a little too advanced for someone with my technical inability. That took me 4.5 minutes to get up, and probably the same amount of time to get down. Rejoining the main road, I flipped it around and went straight into the next climb, Chemin de la Bordina. This one averages just 12% for 3/4 of a mile, but it's quite unevenly graded. I was a little worried when I saw all of the construction vehicles at the bottom, but thought I was in the clear once the climb started. That turned out to be half true, as I was soon greeted with freshly laid tarmac. A bit too freshly laid, as I felt like my wheels were getting sucked into the ground while growing increasingly heavy. This is definitely one of the easiest efforts of the day, and the fact that you still spend a lot of time above 15% probably says a lot about the route. Once again, much of the scenery is rather large properties and construction work, usually a combo. You find a lot of this in the back roads around here, but this is still France, not Monaco, so plenty to muse about there. It's a bit of a shame that the nice sea view is obscured and you have to ride through a tunnel of high walls, but this ride isn't primarily about enjoying the views, so it's okay. After a short flat section, there's just one more kick and then you're nearly at the top, which is another typically unromantic summit. That took me less than 4 minutes, so not too bad at all, and the road surface should be in pristine condition now. Okay, this next one is super weird. This is the brand new climb that I'd never ridden before, and I had no idea what it would be like given the lack of Google Street View imagery. I just had a vague awareness of its existence, having passed by it a few times. And since the ethos of this challenge was all about adventuring up overlooked roads, I had to give it a go. Right away, this slight curve is a little uninviting, but then you're on a nice smooth road, going downhill. An unusual start to a climb, but soon you're going uphill. And then downhill again. And then uphill again, but promptly faced with a fork in the road. It looks like you should go right, as that direction is undeniably up, but left is actually the way to go. The segment is not very impressive, just half a kilometre at 9%, but there is still one indisputable wall section. Unfortunately, it was very short, and it was over before it started to get tiring, so I went left as the road looked like it continued climbing. Nearly went around the left of this tree before remembering that I was in France. I was feeling slightly on edge as this was clearly a residential area that doesn't see much public traffic, and I didn't want to venture into private property, especially having experienced a fair few unfriendly dog encounters over the years. I was tentatively pedaling around this bend when suddenly there was a I decided I had seen enough of Chemin de la Saint-Jean for the day. So that potentially awesome new discovery turned out to be a bit of a dud, but someone had to find out. I'd recommend skipping this one, but at the same time it was quite a fun roller coaster road, so you might want to include it if you want to break along the way. The fourth and final out and backer from this road is Chemin de la Turbie, and it's quite an aggressive turn when approaching from this direction. meters at 18.5%, there's no easing into it, although as you can see from the graphic, the hardest section is in the final third. Unlike most of the previous climbs, which were more or less straight, this one is full of twists and turns as it skirts a nature park, Parc de Grimettes. The road surface is impeccable, which makes the gradients feel much easier as you don't need to worry about wheel slip or dodging stray stones, and the little hairpins make it a really fun one. This bend gets a bit crazy as it dips into the territory where I start worrying about grinding to a halt, but you're through that really quickly and then it levels out. That one took me just a little over 3 minutes, and then it was back down to the Moyenne Corniche with just 2 walls remaining. This is right on the border, so anything to the left is Monaco, but we're just about still in France. And as soon as you turn off this road, you've left Beausoleil and entered the commune of La Turbie. I don't know why I'm standing up and going all weird here because this is not one of the official walls, but it is a climb and still quite a tough one. If you stay on this road without any of the detours I'm going to take, it's a little over 3 kilometers, but that would be too simple, so about halfway up I'm going to take a short excursion up chemin de la Grimettes. It's another one that's too short to have a segment just for the steep bit, but it's pretty nasty, especially when you navigate the corner going into it as poorly as me. I think because it's so short, my brain tends to jump over and dismiss this climb, and I always forget how punishing some of the gradients are, particularly in the second half, and it was a real struggle on this day. Oh, there's a media van waiting to greet me at the summit. My front camera was running into the red and I still had a bit of climbing to get to the final wall, so I switched that off and continued the slog up. By this point, I was quite frankly sick of hanging horizontal over my handlebars at 50 RPM, and it had become a bit tiresome. Anyway, only one left. You can't see it on screen too well, but this climb looks like a sort of bridge. The first time I saw it, I thought it'd be super cool to ride up, and I always thought its construction was kind of interesting. But it was only while editing this video that I learnt that it's actually the remains of a rack railway that ran up to La Turbie from Monaco at the end of the 19th century. It was a single carriage funicular and went up and down a few times a day until a fatal accident led to its closure in 1932. You might think that the lower section of this map looked familiar, and it turns out that chemin de la Crémaillère, which was wall number 3, constituted the lower section of the track. So it transpires that some of these roads, which I assumed were just residential dead-enders, did indeed have a reason for existing and for being so steep. The segment averages around 16% for half a kilometre, getting up into mid and high 20s for a bit. The surface is extremely bumpy concrete, but thankfully quite grippy, although there are quite a lot of drains to watch out for. Even though it's really short, it spends enough time in that steep danger zone that I always end up wobbling about trying to utilise the zigzag technique. You can see that despite the ragged breathing, I'm really not pushing out many watts, which has kind of been the story for the whole ride. I've said this before, but somewhat counterintuitively, I find it difficult to put out power on really steep climbs, maybe because too much energy is being spent elsewhere. It levels out to a gentle 16%, and then the effort is over when you reach this gate. And to finish the ride the same way it started, it's time for a bit of cyclocross. This path takes you into La Turbie itself, and you can see the Trophy of Augustus up ahead, which was a Roman monument built in 7 BC. And there's quite a nice spot here to celebrate completion of the wall challenge. You might be wondering why I'm not looking too happy about finishing this tough ride. Well, I knew something that you don't. My ride was not quite over. All along I was planning to tag 3 bonus climbs onto the end of the route. I wasn't sure if they'd be worth including, and there was only one way to find out. I'll jump over them quickly because, as you might have guessed, they weren't worth including. The first one turned into a flight of stairs just as it started to get good. The second one subsumed all definitions of road. and the third one nearly led to my demise by way of decapitation from falling branch. But still a good time. So from door to door, I culminated 1,500 meters of climbing in 35 kilometers, and it took about 2 hours, which is not the kind of average speed you'd expect on a road ride. If you share the same perverse idea of fun, I would really recommend trying to create a route like this. One of the greatest joys of cycling is that it takes you places you'd never otherwise go, and these kind of localized rides explore a new angle to that. So give it a go and you might uncover some cool history along the way, such as the fact that I've been cycling up a dilapidated vernacular railway for years. If that doesn't sum up this ride, I don't know what does.